originally English. He was born in eastern England, the son of a poor corset maker. And he didn't come to America until 1774, the year he turned 37. His life up until then in England had been an unrelenting failure, both professionally and personally. He couldn't hold on to a job or a wife. And by 1774, the year he decided to turn his back on Britain, the country that had brought him nothing but disappointment and despair, he was bankrupt and riddled with typhoid, the poor guy. And his health deteriorated so much more on the long trip to Philadelphia that he staggered off the ship there, half dead, not knowing a soul. As his health slowly returned, Tom Paine set about reinventing himself in America as a radical, anti-British journalist. He began contributing a few bits and bobs to a local newspaper in Philly, and within a few months he was able to use that brief exposure to land himself a job editing a new gentleman's literary journal in Philadelphia. Here it is. It's called the Pennsylvania Magazine. And editing that literary journal changed young Tom Paine's life. For one thing, it got him thinking about colonial politics, one of his magazine's readers' favorite topics. For another, it taught him how to write and how to shape those readers' opinions. And by the fall of 1775, Paine was ready to embark on a new project, a 46-page pamphlet that he called, I knew you knew this, Common Sense. Tom Paine wrote Common Sense, and if you haven't read it, please go read it. It's amazing. Tom Paine wrote Common Sense to persuade ordinary Americans that they should declare their independence from Britain. As he was writing, tensions with Britain were escalating fast, but believe me when I tell you that no one was yet talking openly about independence as the solution to those grievances. Tom Paine's pamphlet burst on the scene and changed all that. So it matters a great deal. So let's examine briefly how Paine built his case for independence in Common Sense. Paine's greatest power was his brazen confidence. In Common Sense, he makes independence, something previously unthinkable, unimaginable, seem suddenly, somehow urgent, necessary, and imminent. What's so clever about how Paine writes is that the arguments he makes are not actually self-evident truths. What he says in Common Sense is not actually common sense at all, but he makes you think it is. That is his genius. Take Paine's very first argument. It's a simply outrageous argument, especially to someone like me with a British accent. In a world in which kings and princes rule almost every square foot of Western Europe, Paine declares all of them to be illegitimate and demands that all of them be swept away. He denies the heritage of their noble bloodlines. He calls all of them power-hungry ruffians who sit on thrones simply because some ancestor of theirs killed off the previous dynasty of kings. Now, as good Americans, you're probably thinking to yourself, well, he's not wrong, is he? And Paine isn't wrong, exactly. Monarchies, as he says, do descend generation by generation from original acts of violence. And the histories of England and France and other European countries are littered with invasions and conquests in which one king is simply killed by some upstart young man who thinks he can do better. But so what if Paine is actually correct about all that? Remember when he's writing. In the 1770s, kings and princes, all the Western world really knows, no one except Paine can yet imagine a realistic alternative to governing large countries and their growing empires. Most republics of the day were very small. Kings at least provide stability. Kings father princes who become the next kings. This is a system that works, and it's worked for hundreds of years. So to suggest that these colonists should break from the King of England and set out on their own, it requires some huge... What's the Spanish word? I think it's cojones? Is that? Yes, it's cojones, right? For proof of those cojones, consider another major argument from common sense. With fighting already underway at Lexington and Concord and Bunker Hill, Paine's big idea is that the colonists should not back down, should not make peace with England. Reconciliation now with them, he says, is a dangerous doctrine. But really, is it? Peace is a bad idea? In the opening months of 1776, when he wrote this, did any sane person really think that a tiny colonial militia could actually ever beat and banish the most powerful navy and armed forces in the world at the time? It is madness and delusion to think that in 1776. So why not make peace? Safe in the knowledge that the hated king would one day surely die, his unpopular cabinet would eventually be forced from power. Why not make peace? Patch things up, wait it out. Well, because Paine will not let readers of common sense see the problem like that. Paine puts the burden of proof elsewhere, not upon the colonists to prove why they should be independent, but upon the British to prove why Americans should stay shackled to them for even a moment longer. This is what's so amazing and so important about common sense. It's a new kind of argument. It is ballsy enough, yes, confident enough to simply ignore every previous thing thought or said in favor of continuing on as dependent colonies. And Paine works hard to convince readers that the colonists are caught up not in some small or silly domestic dispute about taxes and tea that will soon blow over, but no, they are instead actors in an epic struggle. He says the cause of America is in a great measure the cause of all mankind. With independence, Paine argues, America will become the first beacon for Republican government in the modern world. For God's sake, he says, let us come to a final separation because the birthday of a new world is at hand. And everyone likes birthdays. Paine's pamphlet, which he published anonymously, first appeared in Philadelphia bookstores on January the 10th, 1776, priced at 2 shillings. It sold out within 2 weeks, forcing printers to scramble to print more. Within 2 months, you could find it in bookstores in New York and Boston and Hartford and Providence too. And by May, copies had reached England. It was everywhere. Within months, it had become the best-selling pamphlet of the year. Readers, it seemed, could not get enough. They shared their copies with friends and strangers. They read it aloud in clubs and pubs, even in churches. And most of them loved it. By March of 76, a report was making the rounds in Britain that back in America, common sense is read to all ranks. And as many as read it, so many become converted, though perhaps just an hour before were violent against the least idea of independence. Reading it is like magic. It transforms you. It's the best self-help book you've ever read.